Hi, everybody, and welcome back to what we can probably tell is another special episode of the podcast since you do not hear Scott's beautiful radio voice introducing this. I have had the opportunity to invite Angry MaleVet, a fellow creator that many of you know and love, to chat with us today. This is going to be an unscripted discussion about just pushing back and what some of us as veterans are doing right now. Hi, welcome,
Well,
everybody in my
hello, knitting coat
house.
lady. It's good to see you knitting.
Every
I wasn't sure if you were going to be knitting or not.
I'm also just realizing that my name has like group behavior gal on it, which is super old. Weird. Oh well. Speaking of names, Angry Male Vet. I was just talking with my audience and telling them that I was going to come talk to you, and I said, imagine if I called myself Angry Woman Vet, which is funny, and I think a good place to start, since we need the good white, straight presenting, cisgendered male veterans, literally the most powerful bodies in America, to be angry right now and to be speaking out. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to here?
Yeah. We're out there. We are out there, and more of us are coming out, more often, it seems nowadays, as I think we start to turn, and I think we are starting to turn in a positive place. But my own journey started, I was enlisted, then I was an officer in the United States military, 23 years. And I got done. I was really nonpartisan at the time. Things were a lot less chaotic at the time for sure. And then I got out in 2013 and things had started to become a little bit more brittle, a little bit more confrontational. But I saw Trump running. I'm from New York originally, and so I said, "This is not great." That guy has consistently been a tool throughout his life. A lot of his background comes from New Jersey and New York, and all the dealings and the corruption that he was involved in. Then voted for Hillary, and then I said, "Okay, I'm gonna give him a shot." I think a lot of people thought like, "Hey, we'll give him a shot. Maybe it was all rhetoric. Maybe it was all BS. Maybe he will be an adult, now." And that was just a way to get elected, not the way I would prefer anybody to get elected. But then you started to see what he was doing, and it just didn't stop. Like he was always kind of pushing the boundaries of just decency with everything that he was trying to do and trying to break the norms. And I think the point came from me. He was at like a G7 or G20 conference, and they were getting ready to do the picture, and he pushed aside like the prime minister of Montenegro or so. I can't remember who it was, but he pushed him aside to get to the front, and he started straightening his tie, and he's like, "Okay, here I am for the picture." And something inside me just kind of snapped a little. I come from a background where I was bullied, relentlessly as a kid, and all of that kind of personified into that moment with that guy. It was always something I knew about him, but that just kind of popped for me. And then I just started flapping my face. I started talking, on Facebook and wherever I could, and just ranting about stuff and trying to be the fact checker, trying to be the person like, "Hey, I know he said this, but here it is," and just doing all of the background stuff with it, as much as I could. And I could already start to see the divisions there between people just not believing what was in front of their face. And that was disturbing. It continued to go that way. I was obviously elated when he lost. I was then devastated again January 6th. I was devastated again when I saw Mitch McConnell and others let him get a pass on that. And we got into the Biden years where I was very supportive. I was still pushing, against Trump and getting his convictions out in front of people and all the evidence. And I started to just kind of take it like a mental break, from Facebook, because I really didn't think that he was going to have a chance to go again.
Mhm.
I thought there'd be too many convictions, there'll be too much stuff. It just won't happen. And then as it got into the point where it looked like there was a possibility there, I still thought Kamala was going to, trounce him. And when you look at all of the appearances that she had versus his, trying to fill up, a quarter of a stadium, and that gets into a whole different, topic about the election itself and questions that I have at times. But I think I've been rejuvenated now when he got elected again. Is like, okay, the job is not done. I still have to, kind of put on the mental uniform, if you will, and fight for, the people in this country and, what I think that this country should stand for and what I think our government should be responsible for since we pay them and put them in those positions. And then I was like, okay, well, where can I do that? And I got onto TikTok, and then I kind of just started, ranting in a more calm way. Like the feelings were still there, but it was more of a just trying to give a rational explanation of what I thought was going on, and then the military perspective on things and why I thought people shouldn't fear the military, even though that's what Trump and his minions wanted us to do. And that seemed to resonate with people. And so now I've kind of bumped into another couple platforms. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm some guy in a basement in Ohio. I don't know what the hell I'm doing half the time. I'm trying to figure out podcasts and stuff. But I think the important thing is just getting in front of as many people as possible and just giving them the truth. And from a military perspective, as you know, just giving them honest, transparent information about what the military is really about, the oath that we take, the honor that we have, and that it can't just be broken, by some guy like this, even though he wants to tell you he already did, and he would love for you to be deathly afraid of the military. I just don't think that's the case, and I'm going to continue to tell people that. And so it's kind of neat to just run into fellow, veteran creators. I followed you from the beginning, and to see people just give a dose of sanity, because that's what I think the world needs sometimes.
Well, and let me say, like, I really appreciate you because there is, again, like I said before, like a lack of, I think, like the good male veterans who I know exist, who I've served with, like standing up and saying things right now. And I think you are just absolutely awesome. One more question about your name, just because lots of people are interested in content creators. Journey. Was that a journey or did you come up with that from the beginning?
I think that was kind of a journey. I can't recall what I was before that now. Like that just kind of seems to have taken hold in my brain. I want to say I had like one or two other just kind of nicknames, I was out, flapping my face in the beginning.
Mhm.
And then at some point there was some event, which was the chaos of the day. And I was like, I'm really angry, and I had heard somebody talking about like, we're the veterans, I need more white male veterans. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to encapsulate, what I am at this point and throw it out there. And I figured, that would work. And it seems to have stuck.
Yeah, so just a point for my listeners, I always say make your username your social contract with your audience. Like knitting cult lady, angry male vet, like you know what you're going to get when you hear the name. So I think it's an example of a really good name.
I've had people tell me I should be more angry if I'm calling myself angry male vet. And I am. I just, I keep it down here and I try not to let it taint the information that I'm giving people. So, but the anger is there.
Well, and this is another good point, right? That I think that it's like our military training comes across. One of the things that I have famously done, of course, is called the military occult and written 2 books about it. And folks, usually civilians, will get upset at me for that. And what I say is like, I mean, even if we've never thought of it through the lens of cult, like we know we signed up for this thing, we had no idea what we were actually signing up for, and it permanently changed us, right? Like we never get to go back to being civilians. And one of those things I think is the understanding of how the government works, just at kind of an intimate level. Definitely how the military works. But, I've had this thing, the Children of God, which is the cult I grew up in, famous pedophile cult, performed twice at the White House in the 90s. And everyone has tried to tell me that that was just innocent. It was for Barbara Bush. She just heard about them. Meanwhile, 2 things. We also performed for the president of Brazil, and we also wrote a marching song for Marcos of the Philippines. And nobody pretends like those were innocent. Nobody pretends like those weren't involved in government corruption. But also because I've been inside the government, I know, and like you don't just randomly get invited to sing at the White House. There is an incredible amount of everything that goes into that.
Yeah.
So this I think has been one of the surprising things to me is understanding how much the American people just do not understand our military, do not understand our government. And I think one place where we're getting very lucky though is neither does Trump.
Yeah. Right. Right, and it doesn't seem like some of his people either. Like, in the first wave, people did understand how it works, but usually they got fired because they were pushing against him, and now it's just a bunch of minions and cronies, but you talk about, being invited to the White House and how it works, and, I was just watching a CNN piece, and they were talking about how a white nationalist pastor just gave a service yesterday, Tuesday, at the Pentagon, and Pete Hegseth is there with his hand on his arm and stuff like that, and this is a guy, I can't recall his name. This is a guy who, as part of their, his slant on religion is that women should be in the kitchen, women should be in the household, men should be the providers, like all that misogynistic. And he's got him up out there on a platform, and you can see the audience. There's like a small audience out there, but like half of them are like taking pictures and video of this, of like, I can't believe this is happening. So that's a good response there. But it's insane that those people who used to be on the fringes of society and tucked away in dark corners, with the racists and likewise, they are now front and center. And it's like we've pulled off this big kind of band-aid off this festering wound, and now it's out front. And now it comes down to, okay, what are we going to do with it? We've seen it there for about a decade now. We've known it's there. How are we going to cauterize this thing and save the patient? Because we can't avoid it anymore.
Yeah. Um, I mean, speaking of Pete Kegsbreath, we all hate that guy, right?
Everybody hates him,
Like,
even the military. Even the military hates him.
I think regardless of your politics, we all knew that bro that thought that women shouldn't be in the military, that only straight white men could do anything. One of the things I say about Hegseth is like, he's never listened to an opinion that doesn't align exactly with that.
Yep.
And I think he truly thought when he brought that 24,000 years of military experience in front of them to lecture them about wokeness with a face full of makeup, he truly thought he was doing something there.
Dead silence. Yeah. Quantico was a dud.
All right, so let me ask you the hard question. I joined the military in 2009. Didn't even know about the combat ban, right? Learned about the combat ban in basic training as I was joking about going infantry. And I could not believe it. I could not believe that in 2009 we still actually were saying out loud,
Right.
like, women can't do something. And then, of course, I became one of the women on the Army's first female engagement teams. I feel very strongly about it. How do you feel about women in the military?
Why would we not? Why would we not want them there? I mean, if they have the technical expertise, women have always been smarter than guys. Like, let's be honest. If they have the technical expertise to be out there, then let them be out there. I mean, you were talking about half of the nation. If there are certain physical requirements, there are women that meet those physical requirements. Like if you've had a standard for something that, say, an operations team, like Delta or something like that, where there are certain reasons for certain physical standards. If you have women meet those, like we're watching women meet, standards for Rangers, airborne, all of
Mhm.
these things now, then why would you not put them out there? Like, this is how we adapt as a society as we move beyond the limitations of a patriarchy and a, women are less kind of mindset. And we get to a point where we can flourish as a society, as a species, right? And get over that kind of, white rich man rule, only kind of mindset that has been basically put upon us by white rich men for, all of history. And I think we need to break through that. And I think when, you have a government that deliberately sets limits on what we can do as a society and a species, it feels like they're deliberately going backwards. And I don't know how the hell that benefits them in any way except for their, puffed egos.
Well, that's what I think is so interesting, right? Because, so first of all, it was just crazy to be serving at a time when you're being told you can't do something that
Yeah.
you can do,
Yeah.
right? Like when I was in officer school, they let us take the Ranger physical fitness test, and 5 of us passed it with flying colors. And then it was basically just like, well, And still, there have been 12 men that have promised me that if a woman ever graduated Ranger school, they would fly to my location and eat their Ranger tab in front of me. So, like, one day I'm going to call that in on like
You
CNN
should.
or something.
Yeah.
I mean, the physical, I think standards in the military is just the same as professionalism in the corporate world. It's just about status quo protection. In fact, one of the line that I am the proudest of publishing in my memoir is, because you haven't shown me a man who could do a push-up with his penis, you have failed to defend why, you're saying that women can't be in combat.
Right.
Like, everyone would say that, right? Like, oh, you can't carry a 250-pound man out of combat. First of all, watch me. Second of all, you're not doing that either. We do buddy carries. And third of all, nobody is saying that to the 5'2" Asian dude, right? Like, we in the military have always understood you can use different people for different jobs. And to me, it was so frustrating, right? Like, how easily could you pick me up and toss me over a gate that I could then open
You're
for
right.
everyone, which a 250-pound man would be a lot harder. But the thing that was so interesting, so first of all, in my personal experience, I found that the non-combat arms military was actually more hostile about the idea of women going into combat arms. We showed up to the infantry team expecting that they were going to hate us. And they were like, all right, y'all want to be in the infantry? Like, we're going to bruise you and make you bleed. But if you can pass the test, like, done, right? Like you're on the team and we respect you.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found out that really surprised me was when I went to write my book and we reached out to Fort Knox, the records department, to say, like, hey, what can she call this? She was on this team. She thinks she's one of the first something. What can she call it? And they came back and said, whoopsie, we didn't keep records. So if she has this certificate of cultural sensitivity training and she was deployed with the 101st in 2011, she can say that she was one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team. And what that immediately told me is that I think they all believed it. I think all of the male generals at the top believed the pseudoscience and that women were just going to fail. And I think they thought this was an experiment they were being culturally forced into, but it was going to quickly fail. We're going to get a couple of white blonde lieutenants, and then nobody was going to have the tolerance for that.
Right.
And of course, we found the opposite. Like, diversity is always better. I say that
Always.
we were asking the question, are women good enough to be men? And the actual question was, when both men and women are trying to kill you, it makes sense to have both men and women on your side. So all that to say, the existence of Pete as Secretary of Defense, I as a captain with 6.5 years have more military experience than he does. Right?
Absolutely.
Like,
And he shows
his
it.
existence hurts my soul.
Yeah.
But I'm also not that upset about them yanking it backward from the perspective of they're making their military worse. Like, I am not that personally upset about Donald Trump's military being weaker and, the straight white military that they want to create. Obviously, that is separate from all of the individuals who are being harmed by them.
Yeah. I think we're in a space, and we've seen this throughout history, where we're in that kind of take one step back before two steps forward. Like, I do think, and it's going to be a pain in the ass to get through this one step. It really is. Like, there's a lot of friction. We've seen some of it. We're going to see a lot more before 2028. I mean, we know that. But I do think that we're kind of forming the launch pad for the two steps forward thing, where people look back and go, we really shot ourselves in the ass, for that period of time. Like we could have been, a world power, hopefully for good, and helped people across this globe in so many ways and helped our own society. We could have taken that step forward, and we chose not to. Like, there were enough people who chose not to. There were enough people who didn't choose at all. And I think that we're seeing those signs of buyer's remorse for sure. Donald Trump is not coming back. Whatever he says, whatever Bannon says, he's not coming back in 2028. It's just not going to happen. But I think it's one of those things we're getting into the brains of people and saying, hey, it's not Trump, it's the GOP. The Republican
Hmm.
Party has fully sponsored what we are witnessing today, what we have witnessed in the last 10 years, what we're going to witness in the next 3 years. And it's not going to get any better. And so I think I try to tell people all the time that we can be mad at Trump, but he has no power to do that unless there are senators and congressmen, congresswomen, and billionaires backing him. And that is the infrastructure that we need to take down and we need to break apart. So when we talk about, domestic threats, that is the domestic threat. And Biden was right. Milley was right. We have fascists to the core that are currently running this administration. But I do think that the pendulum swings. And I know that's something that people say all the time. I do think the pendulum swings towards justice. And I think this kind of blunt in our face, this is what fascism looks like, this is what oligarchy looks like. I think that is going to be a catalyst where we step away from this and we move forward, just like we've done in different parts in our history, from 1776 on. I think we are getting to another one of those jumping points if we do it right and we have the right people in the right place. Yeah, it's an absolute show right now, and Hegseth is a personification of that. Trump is, all of the cabinet members, but I do think it's just kind of a all right, we did that wrong, kind of signal to everybody. And I think everybody's starting to feel that. You can see it in the poll numbers. You can see it inside the military where even, I think there was something pro-Trump. There was a pro-Trump organization that came out and they even admitted that Hegseth had lost the senior military leaders. And that was a couple months ago. And that was after Hegseth had become like a running meme for his semi push-ups, and his bravado, attempts to be alpha. He is not liked. He is not respected inside of the military. And so that just goes to the whole, I know people are told to be afraid of the military, but I don't think they should be. I think that when we look at things like Greenland, where behind the scenes
Hmm.
senior leaders were like, "You're a moron, and we are not going to attack
Yeah.
Greenland. We are not going to blow up NATO," and that worked. And they quickly shift gears. I just want people to remember things like that. And then of course, like the National Guard, where the judiciary stepped in and said, "Hey, you're not going to do that."
Mm-mm. Yeah. So, speaking of stereotypes about the military, let's talk about that. You must be aware that you look like a Trump voter, and
Absolutely.
especially that once people know you're military, they probably don't even ask. They just assume.
They just assumed I'm an off-duty ICE agent.
In the same way that when I met a divorced warrant officer and asked him if he had children, I did not think the answer was going to be no. Like anywhere in my head, I was just like, no, of course. So it must be hard for you that people look at you and think you're one thing. And how do you deal with that, like even on a personal level?
I understand it. I understand it because that has been the face of this movement. Right? That has been the face of the Republican Party for decades now. There was one point where they said, "Hey, immigration was good. Let's bring people in," and then they quickly shifted that, into this kind of Christo-fascist, oligarchy slant where not so good. And if you don't look like this, there's something wrong with you or you're lesser. And so I understand that. Like, I walk around in my big, like Wrangler, kind of work jacket and my ball cap, and I absolutely understand that people are like, That guy works for ICE," or "That guy's like, J6," and all that, and I get that. And all I can do is in the way that I act and the way that I, interact with them is be polite and be, authentic and be transparent and be kind. And that's kind of one of those things that I try to do when I talk to people through whatever platform is I try to do that. And I try to be informative and I try to let people know that there are things going on that maybe they're not aware about. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe there are things that are bad that they need to know about. But I just try to, kind of blow up that impression. And I can't do it for everybody because I'm just some guy walking off to the side, who they think is a Trump voter, but I don't let that weigh me down either. Like I don't lose sleep about it at night. All I can do is day by day, step by step, piece of content by content is get the word out and let people know that there are a lot of, really good humans, more good humans on this planet than bad humans. And we come in all shapes and sizes. And that doesn't mean you should run up to everybody in a Wrangler jacket and think that they're a progressive, military vet who hates Trump. I wouldn't say that, but we're out there.
Yeah, and not for nothing, as I mentioned before, you do have an extremely powerful voice as a, I say the same thing about my husband. Like, you look like MAGA's dream veterans,
Right.
but you're on our side. And I have an incredibly powerful voice as a white, straight presenting woman veteran.
Yeah.
And y'all can have conversations that I can't even have because people will take you seriously from the get-go. So thank you for
Yeah.
using your
No.
voice.
Yeah, no, it's the same way. Like, I think as just white, Americans, like, we're kind of behind the power, curve, if you will. We're behind the eight ball a little bit because of what other white, Americans have decided to vote for, and have been told to vote for. I like to think of the fact I have these discussions with people, but there has been a dedicated attempt to basically brainwash people for decades. And with the advent of social media, it has been basically, set afire. And unfortunately, those are the people that are still watching, Fox, and those are the people who won't go into multiple sources for information. They're kind of doing as they're told, and it's unfortunate. And the people behind it know exactly what they're doing, and it seems to have, and they're targeting white people, because they want it to be this Christo, Aryan type of environment, which some broken part of them thinks is the way to go. And so that's who they're targeting. They're targeting that audience out of, fear of losing some kind of white power,
Yep.
and, having to be looked as equal to everybody else. That scares the shit out of them.
Which, I know you know this, but this is one of the other reasons I know they're going to fail because they never listened to the intelligence officer. And like the whole a fascist nation is promising a monoculture, right? It's
Right.
one group of people deserve the power. And never in America has there been a monoculture, and never has there been a way to deliver that, and this kind of goes back to the stereotypes about the military. I used to be so frustrated that the first thing people say to me is, you don't look like a veteran, and I used to be on the veterans, speaker circuit, and Small Business Administration would call me up to give them a talk on how do we hire more veterans, and I would just start with being like, picture that you're casting a movie about post 9/11 veterans. You know, I'm sure you are picturing a 6'2", white, blonde, blue
Right.
eyed man with a jaw that can cut glass and is preferably a helicopter pilot. And then I would be like, they exist, right? I love this one. He lives in my house. However, and then I would just introduce them to local veterans in their area that do not fit that demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really think that this administration and most of MAGA, they believe that, right? They believe the military is who makes up ICE. They believe the military is just straight white men. And the first administration, I found out that the Democrats believe that too, because Trump's campaign had 200 staff members for veteran issues, and the Clinton campaign had one. However, not understanding the depth of diversity in our country and in our military is why we know they're going to fail, right? The
Yeah.
military has just reached 20% women, right? They can't pull it back. You get rid of all women, you shut down your operations.
Yeah.
You get rid of, you know, the logistics branch is mostly not white.
I believe 20% of the military is minorities.
Oh, I thought it was higher than that.
Yeah, it might be. I wanna say I saw that and it was similar to, females.
Yeah, which for those listening, this 20% thing is very, very, very important because there is something called stereotype theory. And the 20% mark, if your demographic is under 20%, you're not addressing subconscious negative stereotypes. Right. So when I was serving in the military, women were only about 10%. I think it was like 15 actually. And so it was just every individual, whether they had served with a woman who rocked or who they didn't like. Like that made up their subconscious mind. However, with 20%, you start to affect this larger understanding. And I actually think it's really interesting because I think the military is actually pretty good at breaking people's prejudices and stereotypes. You know, the military pulls in people from all over the world. And I mean, you can be as racist as you want to be, but when you're in a foxhole with a woman and a black man, you're going to probably get over that really quickly, you
Yeah,
know?
y
And
your team is not gonna be made up by, race or gender or religious preference. They're gonna be the people who do the job.
I think that's another thing that people don't understand about veterans, that, like, one of the reasons we get out with significant leadership skills is because you do not get to choose on your who's on your team.
Yep.
No matter what level of boss you are, you're given a random assortment of Americans, and you have to make that work.
Yeah. Yeah, people just don't I think and I kinda like the fact that for a long time, people didn't really have to think about the military, because they were doing the job, they were out there at night, they were on the wire, they were protecting us, and they didn't really have to worry about it. And, obviously Afghanistan, Iraq, there was such a great, outpouring of support from the American people, especially when it came to Afghanistan, as compared to Vietnam, and what happened there. So I think that has changed, and I hate to see even an attempt to pull it back into a we can't trust the military, kind of mindset, which is what they're absolutely trying to do. And I say that again, but any kind of, fascist autocratic movement is absolutely going to try to make you fear the military because they're the ones with the guns, right? And they're going to
Mhm.
make you say, hey, they work for us, they'll do whatever we tell them. And that is one of the number one narratives that they're going to try to push on people. But again, with all the things that we have seen and the stuff, behind the scenes a little bit, that is not the case, and there has been significant pushback from senior military leaders saying that, "Hey, we're not gonna go that way." If that was the case, if the military was completely under the thumb of these, buffoons, they would be in major, metropolitan areas. They would be arresting, Democratic lawmakers. They would be shutting down this conversation. They would be doing all of that stuff, and that's not happening. They would love it to, but it's not happening.
Yes, and this is where I just think their ignorance really serves us. You know, when he took over the second time and everyone was freaking out about the military, I was literally just saying, "Look, Trump doesn't understand our military." Right?
Yeah,
And because he spent his life looking at dictators' militaries,
yeah,
but our military leaders have also spent their lives looking at dictators' militaries. So, like, they understand him very well.
yeah,
And I keep saying, like, you can replace all the senior leaders you want, but senior leaders aren't really the ones doing the thing in the
yeah,
military. At the end of the day, I truly, truly believe, and I've written very critical books about the military. At the end of the day, I truly believe that if he, was like, launch a nuke, right? Shoot the American people, it's going to be three privates or specialists and a warrant officer that refuses to fly him plays, right? They're just gonna be
yeah,
like, "No, no."
yeah. And I hope people, realize, like, there was just a recent firing of Colonel Dave Butler, and he was the public affairs officer for the Secretary of the Army. But he had worked for Milley as well, Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was fired because Hegseth didn't like him and that he had worked for Milley. This is Dave Butler. This is a guy who spent a lot of times working with Delta, the Joint Special Operations Center. Like, he's got decades of experience and relationship with men and women throughout the military, and Hegseth just didn't like him because he had worked for Milley. He tried to fire him like 3 separate times, and finally he won over Driscoll, Army Secretary, and released him. And that message that goes to everybody else inside the military isn't like, "Oh, we should be afraid of Pete." It's like, how the could you do that to a brother in arms who served with us, in Afghanistan and all these hot spots, especially special operations? How could you do that to an individual who sacrificed for multiple decades and has been there by our side? And it does nothing to help.
Yeah, and, this is where I think they confuse loyalty, right? So, I'm an organizational psychologist these days, and I think loyalty is the worst value for organizations, right? Like, I think it's a toxic value, and it is were you Army? or were you another branch?
I
Or do
was
you
Air
not
Force,
say?
but the Army used to steal me.
Okay. Okay. So the Army's leadership values are it is the acronym for leadership, and their first one is loyalty, which, I'm always like criticizing the Army. But I kind of also think people misunderstand. I used to say, like, I deployed twice, right? And like when we were over there fighting, nobody's talking about the overall mission. Nobody's talking about America and fighting for freedom. But I think when we say loyalty, we're talking about the people to the right and the left of you. When Sal Giunta won the first Medal of Honor, of course, because they decided to turn it back on. And for those who don't know, what he won it for was they were in a almost hand-to-hand combat with the Taliban. Taliban dude was dragging American soldier away, and this dude went and dragged him back. And when he was getting his Medal of Honor, he actually said, I'm honored, but it's a little bit embarrassing because I only did what any man or woman to the left or right of me would have done, right? Because that is our training. And that is what I don't think that any of these tyrants are prepared to deal with. Even, we don't even, I don't know if you knew most of the political leanings of the people that you served with, but I didn't.
Yeah,
We didn't
didn't matter.
talk about that stuff in the military, and it didn't matter. You were judged on your kind of integrity as a person. And I really, truly think that these bad guys have underestimated the United States military.
I think they absolutely have, and again, you've got a guy like Trump who is coming from a track record that's pretty damn when it comes to the military, right? Like five-time draft dodger, losers and suckers. He bailed on a ceremony for the dead in France because it was raining. He had soldiers out rolling out the red carpet for Putin August of last year when he arrived on their hands and knees in front of the Russian security services. Like he's just had this overall disdain for the military because of his psychological makeup, and he understands that they are doing something that does not revolve around themselves. And his entire life has revolved around himself you know and so he can't even comprehend that, and it makes him feel small. John McCain made him feel small, like when he disparaged him about being a POW, makes him feel small, and he doesn't think that should matter. He thinks it should be about the size of his wallet. That's the only thing that matters, and what he can get people to do. And it makes him crazy to think that there are men and women out there in this country who would sacrifice themselves for people next to them to get a job done and not worry about if they were going to get paid or get on the cover of a magazine. Like it breaks his mind. And so I think that's where that disdain comes in from the military, and they feel that. The military doesn't forget. These guys have been around this entire time. They'll be there after, he's gone. I think whoever he fires is going to be reinstated as soon as he's gone, but they understand that, and the people below them understand that. I get some folks talk about, well, they removed this leader, so everybody's going to get in line. That's not the case. What was it when the double tap strike down in Venezuela, to go down there to Southcom for a second, when Bradley, gave the order to, those two individuals on September 2nd, that obviously created a bunch of uproar, enough so that Southcom Commander Halsey decided that he was going to step down and
Yeah,
resign.
sorry.
And then the guy who took over JSOC, where Bradley was command, on October 17th, there was another opportunity to survivors, and he called in rescue. And twice since then, he has called in Coast Guard ships to rescue survivors. And that is because the next guy up is not just going to do what you want. That there are people, and the overwhelming majority of the military is going to follow their oath, and they're going to do what they're supposed to do, because that's why they're there. They're not there to get a promotion. They're not there to get money. They're not there to get a guest starring role on a TV show or something like that. And I absolutely agree with you. He underestimates that to no end, and that will be part of his downfall. Is he thinks they're going to come rescue him when he needs them, and then that won't happen.
Yeah, and the other Venezuela thing when they went in and took the president, that one was actually really heartbreaking for my husband and I because my husband retired out of that unit. the Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I,
Yep.
as an aviation intelligence officer, worked heavily with them during both of my deployments, and then, of course, was a spouse. And we know that that mission didn't fly without legal clearance. We know that all the civilians saying this is obviously a war crime don't know what they're talking about. And yet, you mentioned this earlier, I think he is intentionally trying to use the military in questionable ways. And I don't even think it's about the military. I think it's about the veterans, and I have been really loudly saying, you and I and 15 to 18 million veterans, depending on who's counting, like we are the fifth estate. Right? There is so much more military experience outside the military than inside the military. Not to mention, we taught them their jobs,
Right.
right? Like my little lieutenants that I trained are battalion and brigade intelligence officers. I mean, you joined the military maybe before I was born.
89.
Probably not, but no, I was two. The wealth of experience that we have out here and how quickly I think we would side with the American people. And I think he's trying to break that.
Yes.
I mean, to me, it has been heartbreaking, this administration, how quickly Americans just went to, oh, you all are going to shoot us in the face. I think I believed that the American public had a better opinion of the military than that,
Yeah.
deserved or not. But, I don't think he's winning at this, but
No.
I think he's dealt some really significant blows, and he has turned the opinion of the American people. What do you think?
Yeah, I understand their fear, right? Because again, we talked about that earlier, where for the most part, people hadn't really needed to be exposed to the military, right? And I understand their fear because he comes in as this guy who's straight off the cover of an autocrat, narcissist fascist, and everybody gets these kind of, ties into figures like Hitler and Mussolini and all those guys. And they think like, well, he's just going to do that because he said he's going to do that. Military, these guys with guns, and they're just going to kind of roll over. I think he tried to capitalize on that and cause that fear. So I understand that. I absolutely understand that in the beginning. What I would ask people to think about is like, when it comes to like the National Guard, situation that they were trying to instill in like Portland and Chicago, and they briefly had in LA. There were a number of individuals who stood up. I think one of them was the adjutant general from Oregon, who came out and said, "Listen, our job is to protect the people of Oregon." And when there was the big, kerfluffle going on there, and he's like, "That's what we're going to do." And all of these individuals have come out and like Greenland, where they said, "No, you're not going to do that." All these spaces where the military, they can't really come out and be vocal about it because it's a nonpartisan entity and it's built that way. But I think what you've seen a lot of stuff behind the scenes and then through decisions where it is not what he wanted it to be. And every single day that we go out there and the military is not rolling tanks down the road and, taking over polling places and going into election offices and all those things, there's a reason for that. If he could do it, he would. And he has been told in no uncertain terms that you can't, by multiple people behind the scenes. And I think that the stories that come out after he is gone from some of these guys who retire is going to be very telling. You've got guys like Millie, he's not gone. You've got guys like McRaven, he's not gone. All of these folks, they're sitting out there and they have more ties and more depth of a relationship with these guys than he will ever have with all of these leaders. And I think that that wall will hold. I absolutely think if he had 20 years, he might be able to start to crack it because he would try to do it through recruiting and training and all these other things. But he doesn't have that. And the Republican Party doesn't have that. But he's going to make you think that he does. And so that's the game. He's always been about inflation, not just economic inflation, and jacking us up in our wallets, but inflating what he can do and
Mhm.
his value. And he's always had to do that. And he does that every day. And he especially likes to try to do it with the military. Venezuela was an odd duck because we were in a situation where we were going after a guy who is not a good guy. Maduro is not a good guy. There, were drugs, coming from Venezuela, not to the level, not fentanyl coming through, but there, that is something that we had been looking at for a long time. He probably shouldn't have even been there because that election was rigged and international observers said so. So that was one of those things where he pushed the button there because he wanted to, and he wanted to use the military as a toy and try to send the
Mhm.
message to the rest of the world that he could do whatever he wanted. And that was something that was in the realm of purview of the military to go do. But again,
Mhm.
I go to Greenland, right? Like he would have loved to send the military to go take over, 500 to 1,000 guys, in Greenland and, make enemies of the Danish. And there were enough people, probably an overwhelming number of people who were like, "You're not going to do that."
This is another thing I think people don't understand about the military is soldiers got to be motivated to go to war. The amount
It
of
helps,
propaganda, but also sort of inborn motivation that we had for the war on terror because of 9/11, and with people at a completely different part of the world who look completely different from us. And it was still hard to motivate people to go to war. I was like, how are you going to motivate Americans to invade Canada or Greenland? Like, they're just going to say
right?
no. I think
Or
people.
assault their own people. Yeah,
Right, exactly. People miss this part of how much the military has developed and grown. The fact that it's an all volunteer military, that we don't have do it or else. I mean,
yeah.
I truly believe that regardless of political party, like most active duty military would come down on the side of not committing the war crimes. Just out
Absolutely.
of self-interest, if nothing else.
Well, and because they have a moral compass, right? Like you're taught values, you're taught morals. I mean, when you enter the military, you have a certain set when you enter. But the military does a great job. We're the most highly educated military force in the world. And that is not just, hey, jump this high and here's how you do it. We put our military, especially our leaders, through years of training over and over and over. And a lot of that has to do with, codes and oaths and morals and values, like what is right, what is wrong, international law, Uniform Code of Military Justice. All of those things, go to make a senior leader who 30 years down the road is leading thousands of people. And those leaders, by the way, they go to some of the finest institutes that we have in the United States, in the world, including, I'm going to bring this up, including Harvard, which has some of the most intelligent people in the world teaching, but they teach all sorts of things. It's not military, it's, schools of thought, right? And I will say that one of the things that they would try to do, and they are trying to do, is I think Hegseth just cut ties between the military and Harvard and sending people there. Like they're not going to fund people to go to Harvard anymore for these guys. And a lot of senior leaders had gone there because
Mhm.
education is a weapon and education makes a great leader. And we have the finest military leaders in the world. And now he's trying to kind of pull that back a little bit in certain spaces because he fears education and he fears what these senior leaders, stand for. But just because they cut ties, and this is for the audience, because they cut ties with Harvard, that doesn't make all of these individuals with 30 years experience suddenly say like, okay, we're going to do what you tell us, no matter what you tell us.
Right. And to your point, like, I don't think that Americans understand that, like, almost everybody who's an admiral or a general or a senior enlisted leader has a master's degree or a PhD, right? Like, when you're talking about the education, and I know from being inside the traditional publishing industry, right? So I was told men are not going to read your book. And I said, well, that's usually true. Men don't read books by women. However, soldiers read books by soldiers and cult survivors read books by cult survivors. And there are men in both of those categories. To which I was told, like, no, soldiers don't read books. And I was like,
All the
military
time.
men are the readingest men that I know. That is part of the culture. It's even part of the culture that I criticize, like a commander having a recommended reading list, which you are expected to be reading something off of all
Yeah.
the time, is a bit on the control side that I'm not a fan of. And you should have seen me when a commander tried to tell me not to read fiction. However, there's definitely this idea that it's just a bunch of grunts who wanna kill people, and that has not been our military in a very, very long time.
No, no, on purpose, because it makes for a better fighting force. Intelligent individuals make for better warriors, right? And you would much rather be What is it? What's the saying? You'd much rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, right? And so we have these warriors, and there's intelligent, capable individuals, men and women, and we would love for the world to be a garden, right? But we're prepared if it goes the other way. And I can't remember the stats, but it's just off the charts what we have for our junior enlisted, our NCOs, our officers, as far as the level of education that they've gotten. We talked about veterans a little while ago, and the concern that people had of, hey, the military, veterans, they're all just going to go against us. And I think the stats that came out of 24 were 67% of overall veterans had voted for, Trump. And I understood people worrying about that. Like the economy was a message, all of these things. But then if you looked deeper, 50% of post 9/11 veterans had voted for Kamala Harris. And that tide is shifting. And I think that tide shifts through education and exposure, like you were saying before, diversity, exposure to women, exposure to minorities, people from different walks of life, people from different states, people from different religions, all of those things. We are building a highly competent, highly efficient, highly educated force because because we're including everybody and we're educating them. And so that's the thing that is a big stumbling block for him and people like him, the Republican Party and Hegseth and all those guys, is we've done such a great job, not perfect. We've done such a great job of putting this force together that it's not something you can just turn off and say, okay, you're mine now, and I'll do with you what I want.
Yeah. And the education piece really matters because our military is also very complex, right? Like there's
Yeah.
not a lot that they can just force. And we've seen this, of course, with malicious compliance. We've seen this with all kinds of stuff. I will never get over the picture of the DC guard picking up trash.
What the
Right?
hell?
I heard about it on social media and I was like, okay, I want to see the pictures. And what I thought was it was going to be pictures of like soldiers were told, as you're patrolling, if you see trash, bend over and pick it up. No, no. It was a full call police line. And I was like, that was some captain, maybe colonel, being like, okay, you want me to clean up DC? Like, I'm going to give the American people something to infuriate them. And I think it was just brilliant. It was just
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just having them out there in the first place, it's just such a diminishment of them. These are, DC natives, these are DC residents who now suddenly have to leave their jobs so that they can go out and do things like that and stand there and be a photo op for, the GOP and Trump, just like Quantico was. Like he just wanted a picture in front of all the generals, like all of those things. It's such a waste of their talent and their resources and who they are as human beings. And it's just the latest in a long line of just disparagement, between Trump and the Republican Party, on the United States military.
For sure. For sure. So, speaking of books, are you writing a book?
I'm not. I am not. I don't even I'm still trying to figure out podcasts. Like, I do my, little kind of, notices, for people about what's going on and just some insight every now and then. And I throw it on TikTok and then I copy and paste it over to YouTube and then Substack. And I'm thinking about getting back on Blue Sky. I'm still trying to figure out podcasts and how to get that word out there because I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of cool human beings, senators and congressmen and, the CDC officials who got fired because they think kids should have vaccines, people running for Congress, people exploring why Grok is pushing nude images of children and allowing users to do that, and big tech is having nudify apps. Like, and I have this opportunity to talk to all these great people that I think we as a society would get a benefit out of listening to, and I'm just trying to figure out how to expand that reach. And so a podcast is my next realm that I think I'm on Apple, I think I'm on Spotify, but Substack does that for me. But I don't know the ins and outs. Like I'm new to this. I'm some guy in a basement in Ohio who's just trying to figure it out and talk to people and give them some kind of, minuscule sense of sanity every now and then, hopefully.
Well, that's why I'm talking to you because we want to hear about the random people in Ohio pushing back. Um, but I will say I've learned that books are very, very good products for creators. And if you do ever want to go that route, I can probably be helpful to you.
Awesome.
Whether that's like idea development or whether that's selling, because I have learned that I am incredibly good at selling books on the internet. which is probably unsurprising since I've been selling books since I was 1 years old. They just used to be cult books.
Right.
But, to me and to my journey, it has been helpful that I've written both of my books as I was creating my online platform, because I think you end up tucking your area of expertise into your books very well. And the other thing I will tell you is that my most recent book, The Culting of America, completely crowdsourced. Like how I built my platform, I failed to do it with my first book. I didn't know how to talk to people. But when I sat down to work on this research book, I was like, I wonder if anyone wants to know this. And then I just crowdsourced the whole book. So your audience will tell you, what book wise or not, my only recommendation to anyone is your audience will tell you what they want more of, and then just do more of that. That's how I got into reading snippets of books to people in the first place. And also the knitting. I just knit to keep the words on the page. And then the
Right.
audience was like, that's really cool. And I was like, okay, I could do that all the time.
Right. Right. Yeah, my people seem to put up with me. I have a great crew. They're very supportive. They're just like all the time and talking about things, and they have some great insight on stuff. They'll drop snippets of things that maybe I hadn't heard about, and I adore that. Like because we just don't have the capacity, and so I'm very lucky to have the people on this crazy ride with me that I do. So yeah, they haven't kicked me, off the boat yet. So I'm pretty appreciative of that.
People ask me all the time where I get my news from. I'm like, well, one of the places I get my news from is my audience of almost 1 million people. I have an incredible human network that has only been wrong a couple of times. The Qatari base was one of the times. And then I learned that when humans are really scared, they don't give as good information. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, but they are. I mean, there's so many people out there. Like you and I are lucky enough where we have an opportunity to talk to a lot of people, but it doesn't happen without everybody else. And
right.
this mass outpouring of people who just want to fight back and just want to have some sanity, and they want to have a better world for themselves and their children. Like it's unstoppable. If we point it in the right direction, and I think we are. I think we really are, and I think the frustration with this administration, with this entire movement, not just here but globally is too strong, and then you dribble in the stuff with, that guy Epstein and the global criminal enterprise that the UN has now called it, that he was running. We're at this point where I think we're getting ready to jump forward. We just have to get through this step backwards and dealing, with the stupidity and the buffoonery and the fear that they will push on us for the next couple of years. But I haven't seen the American public like step back. I've seen them just get stronger every single time. And you have catalysts like Renee Good and Alex Freddie, and Keith Porter, like all of those people and the
Yeah.
conditions that are happening inside of detention centers. And I think that it's building up for this. I can't wait to see the protests in 26. I cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'm writing a book now called An All American Fascism, trying to show that, we've sort of always been these people. But also, what I find is that every time, the Puritans didn't come here with the concept of freedom of religion. But this guy named Roger Williams was like, hey, let's separate church and state. And then it was born anyways. So, like,
Yeah.
every time there is an attempt to crack down on freedom, we end up better defining freedom. Like
Yeah.
what we're doing right now is part of making a better union. And I think maybe a good place to leave this is I'm a super huge Hamilton fan, the musical. Like,
Love
oh my
Hamilton.
gosh. And the first part of Hamilton, this is what he's describing, right? There might be a war, we might die, but if we survive, we're going to get to build a new nation. And that's where I get like my hope from. I don't find that being in the details is that depressing for me, maybe because I'm an intelligence officer by trade. But if I spend a lot of time thinking about what this is going to look like in the future. I definitely think I'm going to perform my cult baby veteran musical at the White House of the new like America that we create, and I think some of us that are out here doing this, like 20 years from now, we're going to be some of the leaders or the big news channels, Aaron Parnas is already the fifth most watched news source in the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And he's a 26-year-old guy who just started pushing
Breaking the
back.
news.
and breaking the news. So
Yeah.
it's kind of cool in a way that like the gatekeepers are not in charge anymore. They're not controlling the gates. Like we are living through the breaking of our culture. I truly believe this. We are living through the kind of the pulling down of patriarchy, white supremacy, maybe even capitalism, and it's really hard to get through right now. And this is for the audience, y'all. I know it's hard. And I know, especially when you don't have the inside scoop the way Angry Male Vet and I sort of do, especially when you don't have the training, it can be hard. But I love to encourage people, you can't spend all your time fighting back. And as someone who has survived some pretty bad things, dreaming about what you want in the future is an actual survival tactic. So don't stop with your dreams, y'all. Don't let the craziness knock you off, pushing back. And remember that there are male veterans in basements in Ohio who hate that guy and are doing what they can.
With a passion.
Thank you so much for having this discussion with me. I really appreciate your time, your 23 years of service, and the fact that you haven't stopped serving your country.
No, thank you. Thank you for everything that you're doing and everything that you've done and everything you're gonna do. It's important. You're a big voice for a lot of people and getting information out there and those doses of sanity. So please never stop. I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for you having an hour with me to just kind of shoot the and talk about where we want to take this country.
Yeah, I'm firmly aware that the reason they didn't want us to have the badges and the cool stuff is because then they knew they couldn't shut us up. And so they can't shut me up. There
Nope.
you go. First big memoir by a woman veteran in the mass market. And there's just nothing they can do to us when we start speaking out and when we actually know like who we are in society and what we represent. But also, the fact that there are so many of us on the internet calling him an asshole and pushing back is also what keeps the rest of us safe. We are keeping each other safe by doing this. So, thank you so much. Mr. Knitting Cult Lady is a big fan, and I am grateful for this discussion, and I know my audience will really appreciate it as well.
Tell them I said hi, and thanks again.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a day. All right.